at the funeral, she came up to me afterward, and she said, she asked me, hey, why did my son commit suicide? And all I could think of at the time was like, I really didn't know your son. And I'm thinking how embarrassing that is, that I'm the guy's commander.
I'm Joe C. Mandel, and this is Raven Conversation. And today I'm joined by, honestly, a legend. I think he had an impact on my career. One of the greatest officers I've ever had a privilege of serving with, Colonel retired Greg Allen. And your list of accolades is far beyond what I could even imagine. But former 96 Troop Command Commander, one of the 161 Commander, former G3, former Chief of Staff. You were with Alpha Company 119th. Special Forces officer. I appreciate you coming on, sir, and joining us and kind of sharing your guard story and what you've been doing since retiring.
Well, first of all, just thanks, Joe, for having me here. This is an honor. I'm humbled. Just the fact that you guys remembered who I was. So, yeah, it's pretty cool to be here. So it's been a while since I've been on the campus. But thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I coming down the hallway, I could hear you coming, and people were like, hey, before you get wrapped up in this, I got questions for you, and you kind of get stopped, just like normal. So intro and background on yourself. Like I said, I can kind of glaze over, but I know you have a pretty extensive background in the military. And
so I'm from Tacoma. I was born overseas, but I'm an Army brat, but Tacoma's my home. And went to West Point, and after I graduated from West Point, was in the military. Actually started out as a field artillery guy at Fort Carson, and then 2 years later, I came back here, I came to Lewis to serve as a fire support officer for 2nd Ranger Battalion. And then from the Rangers, I decided to go the Special Forces route, so I did that, and then came right back after my 2 years at Bragg. I came right back and got a job with First Group. Spent 3 years at First Group. Went to selection for Delta Force. Made it, and I was on my way to Bragg when I met my wife, and decided that taking her to Bragg probably wouldn't be a great choice. And an opportunity came up for me to be the first active duty officer to command a Special Forces company in the National Guard. So they actually did a swap for one active guy to go to the National Guard and for a National guy to go to the active duty. Mm-hmm. And so it kept me here in Washington State. So I went to Buckley, got to Buckley around 1999, and it was the first time that I had ever done it. And I had heard all sorts of horror stories about how bad Alpha 119 was. And I got up there, and I realized that I knew half the company from whether they were from the Rangers or from First Special Forces Group. Bottom line is I knew a lot of the guys. And we just sort of changed a little bit in terms of the culture and in terms of training and in missions overseas. And built the company to where we were chosen then to be the first National Guard company to be mobilized in support of, before it was even OIF, but we were the first company. We went to Kuwait in 2002, spent 6 months in Kuwait, and then rolled into the initial invasion of Iraq back in March of 2003. And but right before that, I was actually hired in 2001 to work in the G3. So I switched from active duty to National Guard to AGR in 2001, and then 9/11 hit. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I was actually a part of the Guard. And then when I came back in 2004, I rolled into the MRO job in the G3 shop, and that really just led my time then to work in the G3 in terms of Building 1 and 161 and 96 Troop Command. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
So yeah, you grew up in Tacoma, and I think one of the funniest things, and I remember going to Bellarmine with you. We were there for assembly. You went to Bellarmine. You played football there.
I did.
You had to work though to pay for Bellarmine while you were there too.
Yeah, Bellarmine's private school. My dad's retired NCO, so it wasn't like I grew up around a lot of lakes, but not on the lake. And but Bellarmine really helped me. So where I grew up right outside the North Fort Gate at the time, what it was called. And so a lot of kids in the neighborhood, we were all military kids. But my parents, by the time I got into high school, and I was going to public school until around high school, at that point, my parents wanted to get me away from some of my friends, and they sent me to Bellarmine. And so I did some work. I was actually on a scholarship program where I had to keep my grades up, and I was decent in sports. And so I had to continue to play sports and I keep my grades up, and I think that's what helped me get into West Point. So,
talk about the process of getting into West Point.
Yeah, so I actually was recruited and had actually accepted into the Air Force Academy. I was recruited there to play football and had accepted to go there back in November of my senior year. And I didn't hear anything from West Point, and I had already been turned down a scholarship, an ROTC scholarship for Notre Dame. And and obviously going to the Air Force Academy I thought was a pretty big deal, and I could play football there. But I got accepted into the West Point around April of my senior year, and I had heard stories that Air Force was a little bit more math and science engineering as opposed to West Point, even though, obviously that's not true either. But that's what I was told. And so I was thinking, when I got the acceptance into West Point, I was thinking, okay, I'll just walk on there in terms of football and go to West Point, because obviously my dad was Army, my sister was Army, and it's like it probably was easier for me I thought it would be easier for me to adjust.
Yeah. So how'd you learn about the Guard? I mean, it's always kind of a fascinating story. I think we all have an interest in.
Yeah, I've got the funny part about the Guard is I actually had worked with the Guard when I was at Carson with the California National Guard. And I did a 2-week assessment of the California Guard. We were helping them like on an RTEP at Camp Roberts back in 1990. And so that was the first time I'd ever really met anybody in the Guard. And then a year later, for Desert Storm, in August of 91, we were at a place called Pinyon Canyon, and that's when Saddam invaded Kuwait. 2 months later, 4th Infantry Division that I was part of, we ended up going to NTC it turned into a 3-month rotation. And they told us that we were going to be part of the first group to go over to Iraq, or to Kuwait at the time. And what they ended up doing is they called us back from Christmas, and instead of us going to Kuwait, they sent about 400 to 500 of us down to Fort Hood, Texas, to train up the Mississippi National Guard and the Texas National Guard so they could go overseas. And so of course we were all pretty mad. It's like, okay, seriously, we're going to train up the National Guard so they can go to war while the rest of us are staying back here. That's crazy. But anyways, that's what happened. And we actually volunteered to go overseas with them because we wanted, a lot of us just wanted to go overseas to go to combat. And the war ended up, it was 5 days, and that was over. So that was really my first experience working with the National Guard. And the National Guard, the funny thing about the Mississippi National Guard is I think it was the 155th Brigade or battalion who actually replaced me in theater like 20 years later in Iraq in 2009. So they're the ones that we actually evaluated and helped get ready. But at that point, we had guys that were riding, guys that wouldn't train, that didn't want to go to war. And the reality is is I wanted nothing to do with the National Guard. After that deployment to Fort Hood, Texas,
Then you're good.
wanted nothing to do with the National Guard. And that was 1991. Well, now fast forward to 1999, and after I'd already turned down going down to Fort Bragg for Delta Force, and at that time I was with my fiance, I had the offer to become the first active duty officer to go command in that SF unit, and I didn't necessarily want to do that at first, but one, it kept me here, and it was up in Buckley, so it kept me here in the area. But when I saw the guys in the company, I'm thinking, there's a bunch of rock stars up here. It's like, why wouldn't I want to do this job? I mean, whether or not I've heard horror stories about how bad it's been managed or whatever, bottom line is there's a lot of good NCOs and officers up here.
Yeah.
So that's how I decided to take that job. And at first group actually wanted me to turn Alpha 119 into like an additional company for them to augment a lot of their missions. And we sort of did that. We had a lot of support from first group. Our headquarters was actually in Utah. But I received a lot of support from them. But to be honest, though, I got a lot of support from the state, from the Washington National Guard. We were part of 96th Troop Command, and had a lot of really good leaders. I got to meet General Tony, who at the time General Tony was the Chief of Staff. General Kelly was the G3. So I worked with some really good guys. That General Legowick was a great mentor to have these guys, and so when I was actually getting ready to leave to go to back then CGSC, I remember running into General Legowick, and General Legowick asked me what I wanted to do. I was like, "Well, sir, I'm actually getting ready to leave command. I've been here over 2 years now. I got orders to go to SOCPAC or CGSC, and then to SOCPAC in Hawaii." And Legowick asked me, "Well, have you ever thought about staying here in the Guard, as an AGR?" And I was like, "Well, sir, I mean, it crossed my mind, but I didn't think you could do it since I already have 13 years in.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that, you guys would keep me, or hire somebody with 13 years in. And I believe at the time, I forget what the rules were, but I think you had to, retire at 20 or something like that, so I said, I don't really know what my goals are, but I mean, I'd love to stay here with the National Guard, but I would, I would like to potentially stay on, my current promotion track, as well as, as well as just the time in service. And he said, let me work it, but I'm pretty sure we can get you going from active duty for one day to active guard the next, which was nice. So I didn't have a break in service. And at that point I realized, gosh, the Guard can do anything they want to do.
It's kind of true. So you were able to retire here in Washington from the Guard. What have you been up to since leaving? It's been what now, 6-7 years since you've
it feels
that uniform?
It feels like it's only been 5 or 6 years, but the reality is it'll be 10 years in August. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But I started my own company in 2017. Previous to that, I did some contracting. I ran the security for the pipeline in North Dakota. So if you remember the riots,
yeah,
I was behind all that, and we provided. I provided the overall security for the pipeline, really more so to work with the police and the sheriff, as well as the pipeline company itself. But it helped that I had some experience, in terms of domestic emergency and civil disturbance, and was able to tie that into that mission. And I started doing assessments as well, and I was also working with a retired General Ferreter, and we were helping veteran-owned businesses get their businesses into military installations. So doing a lot of business development. So companies like Black Rifle Coffee, who are Washington National Guardsmen, the intent was to help them and just a host of other companies as well, to get them into AFES and into NWR, and just to help with business development. Well, that led to a contract with Microsoft, where I had a veteran-owned company that had reached out to me to say, "Would you help build a disaster response plan for Microsoft for their campus?" And so I helped build the bid, and sure enough, we ended up getting we ended up winning it. And next thing I know, then I'm running the company, and it's like, okay, well, I don't know if I signed up for this, but the nice part about working with Microsoft is I learned a lot in terms of the corporate world, and then COVID hit. Yeah. But after COVID, I got connected with some private schools who their insurance company worked with Microsoft. And they referred me to, they gave me a referral and said, hey, you might want to talk to these private schools about doing assessments for them, a security and safety assessment. And so I started doing that, and we've really have been focusing mostly on private schools. I'd love to get into public schools, but unfortunately they don't want the help. But we've done quite a few private schools over the last 3 years. We've done like 30, 35 schools, to include work in Oregon with a rehab facility, working with some schools right now up in Seattle, to include a university up in Kirkland. And what we do is, not only, and most of the guys that work with me are all Washington Guardsmen, whether they're senior NCOs or retired officers. But besides doing the assessment itself, we also build emergency operations plans, and we do training, and we'll help with their training, exercises, drills. And so it's been pretty enjoyable. And the nice part about it is the hard part is running your own business, because it's not like you have someone that can do your marketing, your advertising, right. So you're doing all that yourself. But the nice part is that, what's nice about working with these schools is that they truly enjoy the fact that you care. Yeah. And that someone would actually come talk to them and tell them that, hey, here are some issues, like maybe with your access, gaining access into your school, or here are some things to think about in terms of your perimeter, your lighting, your fencing, all this stuff. And so it's been enjoyable working with the schools. And then, like I said, we just did a rehab facility down in Oregon, and one, they care, and they're not just like, hey, here's your bill, or here's your here's your check, see you later. But they constantly now, it's almost like we're serving as their consultants. Yeah. Even though we don't get paid, a lot of it's like, hey, what do I do here? And so, but it's nice.
It's almost a little bit busier in retirement than.
Yeah, it's the nice part. It definitely keeps me busy. You don't realize how spoiled you are as a colonel until you have to make your first. Until you make your own PowerPoint slide. You don't realize how hard it is to make a PowerPoint slide. You don't realize. Writing all these reports. Yeah. Except for the War College, it's just like, oh my God, it's like, how do I work these bullets? Like, because I don't, my bullets keep moving back and forth.
That Iron Major.
Oh my God, I have no idea how to work margins. I have no idea how to do any of this stuff, and now I'm doing it on my own. Yeah. And you don't realize how spoiled you are as a senior Army officer. But I've learned a lot, and I truly enjoy just the service portion of it. These guys. They really appreciate what you do, and this is what it's all about. So
yeah, and you kind of lead into my next question, and service is a huge thing for you, and it's always been part of your life. So kind of going back to your service in the military, what are some of those things that just they stand out, right? I think one thing for me that I will always say stands out, and people on there that have ever met your memory is quick. You know everything about everything. You can look at something and then be able to spout 50 facts about it. And it was just so phenomenal to see that. So I think that's something that always stood out to me. But obviously you got some different memories, I imagine, of service.
That's funny that you mentioned that in terms of memory. And I will tell you that this is sort of a sad story, but this happened to me in 2008. So in 2008, I had 3 kids that committed suicide in 161 prior to going overseas. Mm-hmm. And I had a mom. We were down in Vancouver, and I had a mom for the PFC that killed himself. And at the funeral, she came up to me afterward, and she said, she asked me, say, hey, why did my son commit suicide? And all I could think of at the time was like, and sorry for swearing, but I'm still good at swearing. I don't shoot it back anymore, but I still swear. But I'm thinking, it's like, fuck. I really didn't know your son. And I'm thinking how embarrassing that is, that I'm the guy's commander. And the mom wants to know why this kid committed suicide. And I didn't know who he was. And so I told myself after that, it's like, from now on, I don't care who it is. Because you failed. I failed that day. And I told myself from that day on that I would get to know every single kid in my battalion, every single person I work with. I mean, it takes 5 minutes to listen and to look at somebody, and when you hear their name, remember it. And I think, we take that for granted. And I just told myself, it's like, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
Just remember these guys, and and again, I still remember that story like it was just like yesterday. And so I do try to remember. I don't. Now that I'm getting older, I don't remember as much. But that was that meant a lot to me.
Yeah, and you kind of hit it. It doesn't take much. I mean, 5 minutes of having a conversation with somebody, and you can pull so many facts from somebody. For sure. And then you have that kind of recall of hey, what you talked about with them. And I think that's a fantastic thing. And I always look at that as something that I think I pull from you, right? Is that trying to connect in that human to human aspect. So which is so critical, I think, in this job. Not to skip questions, but I think that's kind of some advice that you're almost kind of imparting to those younger Guard officers that maybe don't have that, because we live in a society where it's easy just to text somebody or shoot them a message via signal. They don't have that face-to-face connection.
For sure. Well, I can tell you, and this ties into, really your last question as well, in terms of just experiences, through my career. And I can tell you that, there are things like, again, being in the 1st National Guard Company. Mm-hmm. And in fact, at the time, it's pretty funny story, but the director of the National Guard, I believe his name at the time back in 2003, his name was General Schwartz. And at the time, in March of 2003, we had Blue Force trackers. And I was told this story after the fact, but the general's he's getting briefed on his staff on what's happening with the war. And as they're looking at the Blue Force tracker, at NGB, they're looking at the screen, and all of a sudden there's these 3 little markers that pop up in South Iraq, or the southern portion of Iraq, that were guard symbols or guard trackers or whatever. And they're like, who's that? And then someone said, I think that's Alpha 119, or I think this is like the Alpha 119 guys. And the general's like, who authorized those guys to go into combat? Like, well, they were on a training mission in support of Operation Desert Spring. But next thing you know, these guys are in Iraq. So when I think of my experiences, it's I can say that being like the 1st National Guard Company, or commanding the 1st National Guard Company in Iraq is pretty cool. While I was in Iraq, we helped provide the interpreter. It was in my tent, actually, where my translator actually translated the intel for where Jessica Lynch was. And then that night, the SF guys, the CAD guys showed up and watched the entire. It was like being in a Tom Clancy movie. But
wow.
We watched the Delta guys go in and rescue Jessica Lynch. So that was pretty cool. Things like the stuff that I did in back in the Rangers, back in Central America, or I had the opportunity to lead the first mission in Uzbekistan in '96. My rotation in 2009 with 161, the Oso mudslide. I mean, I've had an opportunity to be on some really cool missions. To whether I was leading them or being a part of them, they're all things that I cherish. But when I think back on what I really enjoyed the most about my career, it's like the things I think I enjoy the most is like seeing Paul Sellers as a 1-star. I mean, that's fucking crazy to me, and then you see Tim Osmer as a full bird colonel. Mike Akey as a 1-star. Yeah. You see these NCOs wearing stars. I mean, to me, that makes my career. I mean, when I think of things I've done, it's not really necessarily the places I've been or the things I did, but it's more so just seeing, God, look at all these guys that I had the honor and privilege to serve with. And they were badasses back then, and now they're like in charge of a bunch of badasses, And so when I think of what I really enjoyed the most in terms of my military experiences, yeah, I've got those memories of doing cool things. It's always cool to jump out of an airplane. But I mean, how cool is it to see guys that you've known since they were lieutenants or since they were E3s?
Yeah.
And now they're leading an organization, or they've retired.
Yeah,
it's true. And they retired at senior levels. Like a Dan Dent. It's just I that's what I miss the most, or that's what I cherish the most is I feel like I had a chance to serve and maybe mentor at times some really good people.
Yeah, and you kind of wrapped up a lot of the questions I had right there in that answer, and I think and it's all good, sir. I appreciate that, because at the end, I think you hit on something that I think a lot of us always say. It's less about the assignments we do or the missions we end up doing. It's more about the people, and that's what this place is. It's not a place you go to work. It's basically a second family that you grow up with. I think I first met you. I was still at Echo, one of the 161. I was a cadet before I moved over to be in 341st, and you even had an impact then as a lieutenant colonel on me.
That's pretty fun.
And years later, now here I am, a lieutenant colonel, trying to have an impact on my officers below me. So.
And you definitely are.
And I always draw back to it's the people we meet here, I think, that always make this place amazing.
And it is, and I look back and and unfortunately, we've lost a lot of good people, whether in combat, whether as private contractors, whether it's cancer or just serious PTSD issues. I mean, I can look back and I can still see all their faces, and people that that you worked with, on a daily basis, and it really was about those guys. Yeah. I mean, you look at an Abby West, or Guy Baratieri, or Russ Nolte, or Zach Wadey. Just the list goes on. Kelly Wortman. Yeah. I mean, just the list just goes on and on and on, and it's hard to think back about those guys, but you think what a great place. I mean, what an honor.
Yeah.
For me to have served with those guys. And actually to call them friends. I mean, that's what's so darn cool about this organization, is that it was more than just serving with them. We were all friends, you don't get to do that every day.
Yeah, that's true. We get to grow up with each other. And spend that time together.
And that's what really makes the Guard, too, a lot different from active duty, is that we are together. and we, whether or not we like each other at times, I mean, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, we're together the entire time.
Yeah.
So, so I think I do think a lot about those guys. The one thing about the military, though, for me was, as much as I miss it, I never really wanted the military, though, to define me. It was a step in my life that I knew it was time. I knew that the only way I was going to get promoted to 07 was leaving the organization and headed back to, in fact, it was General Mathis's old job in D.C. But I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to pack up the family and move the family. But I just thought, what, it's just time to move on, because there's just so much talent behind me, and if I don't leave, then the Tim Osmers, the Dan Dents, the Nick Stewarts, the Bill Coopers. Who else? The Joe Simondels. I'm looking at all these guys. If I don't leave, these guys aren't going to get promoted. And they may, but it may take so long because I'm holding up a slot here that, my thought process is, first of all, you guys are so much smarter than I'll ever be. That's the truth. I'm humbled by just, trust me, you're brother, you're so much, as an intel guy, I'm already humbled in the fact that, okay, here's Joe and I'm a dumbass. You truly are a smart guy.
I give Pete a lot of credit for making me always look good here.
Well, there you go. And that's just guys like Pete. Again, that's why I'm humbled. But I look at guys like Tim Osmer. Yeah. I look at again, the Paul Sellers, the Kristen Durdas. It's just the list just goes on and on and on. And I'm just thinking, what? Maybe it's all right for me to leave. I think maybe I've done my job, and it's time now for them to lead and be in charge. And I'm thinking, if I leave, let's say by the time I'm 50, that still maybe gives me 10, 15 more years where maybe I can truly find what my purpose was for being here on this world. And I still don't know. I really enjoy what I do, helping out schools and other businesses. But I don't even know if that's really what defines me. I don't know, what my purpose is, but, I'm out there trying to find it. Yeah. And I'm glad, I'm glad that I had the experience that I did. But it's just time to, figure out, hey, what's the next step in life.
And sometimes it's just teacher, loving husband, loving father.
Yes, sir. And I tell you, my wife, she, when I made the decision to leave, to not go to Delta Force, I did that. It was a calculated move. It really was. But I look back at her experience, and several years later, we've got a 1-year-old or, year and a half year old, and it's August of, or September of 2002, and it's like, hey, I'm leaving for Kuwait, and she sends me a note the next week, and at the time, we're still using American Online and or AOL, whatever it is, and the speed dial or whatever it was called.
Oh, the dial-up.
Dial-up,
yeah.
And it wasn't like we had cell phones, and so. So when I left, she sent me an email, and a week later, she said, "Hey, by the way, I'm pregnant."
Oh, wow.
So she went the entire time. It wasn't until March. It was March 9th. I still remember this too. So March 19th of 2003, we're sending out teams. I'm with 5th Group at the time, and we're sending out teams the night before the war started. And I decided I need to call my wife. So I was able to get through. It was one of those things too. Back in the day, we had to call the operator on Fort Lewis, and then the Fort Lewis had to then make you, and you only had so much time to talk to.
Yeah.
And so then the operator then connected from Fort Lewis, contacted Heidi, and so I'm talking to Heidi, and I was like, by the way, I can't tell you what's going on, but just you'll see the news. But I don't know when I'm going to talk to you again. And she's 6 months pregnant at the time, and I and the phone just got, it was totally silent. And, there wasn't a whole lot to say, It's like, hey, just good luck and, love you and take care of baby. And it wasn't until May, and I had a satellite phone with me, but I only used it once to try to call home, and I missed her. And it wasn't until May that I was able to talk to her. So for 3 months, or from March 19th until probably, second week of May, I didn't talk to her. So I had no idea what was going on with her pregnancy, anything. And she had no idea if I was even still alive.
Yeah.
And so I finally reached out. And she said, "Hey, by the way, we're expecting to have our second child, i.e. a girl, on May 25th." So yeah, that's just to think that you put your families through that, but they're really the unsung heroes in all this as well. You look at all the guys you serve with, but you look back at all their families, and you think, especially for the kids that get killed, or they come back and they're sick or whatever, and you just think what these families are going through.
Yeah.
So it's just hard, but it's just it's part of what we do. It's part of what you sign up for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you've passed on a lot of stuff, sir. Any kind of last advice you'd give to those young Guard leaders, NCOs, officers, even junior enlisted folks out there that you want to kind of impart on them? I think you have a lot of good lessons. So
yeah, when I think, there's so many different leadership characteristics that you can look at. The one thing I think, whether it's integrity and honor and duty and selfless service, a couple that really stick out to me. And this isn't necessarily one of those leadership values, in terms of, what the Army teaches, but it's just something as simple. It's a 4-letter word, and it's care. Just care. Not just enjoy what you do, but truly care for these soldiers. Love these soldiers. Love your peers, but just care. Care to show up on time. Care to build the a good risk assessment. Don't just rubber stamp it, but actually care. Get to know your guys. You don't need to go out and drink with everybody and get to know what their Social Security number is, but just show you care. It's incredible that I think Napoleon said it that he could take the world with a roll of ribbon by just giving a kid an award.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and I tell you, I've had debates in the front office about awards. It's like, my God, who freaking cares?
It's free.
At the end of the day, if the only thing that you have to remind you of your military service is an award, well, you know what? Then more power to you. I would have no problem giving, and I was guilty of it, but I'd do AT with 161, and I swear to God, and we'd have a formation at the end, and I think I had the entire battalion out there getting an award, an AM.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, yeah, but now you're going against the theory that, why give all kids trophies? Well, the reason why you give every kid a trophy, because there's a lot of kids that aren't doing that shit.
Yeah.
There are a lot of kids that are sitting around drinking and doing drugs and playing video games. And here's this poor schmuck who's not even good. I mean, he's out there at soccer practice every day, and whether or not that kid's talented or not, he's making his team better by being out there. You know, and those soldiers, whether those privates, E4s, E5s, whether they're not in a leadership position, just the fact that they're given their time to be there.
Yeah.
Again, I know I'm going to swear, so I apologize, but it's like, how fucking cool is that? So if the only thing I can do is give this kid an AEM, so 10 years from now he's in the VFW, and he can tell all his buddies about how he got an AEM from Colonel Allen, you know, at AT in 2006. How fucking cool is that?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's just the shit. So I think caring to me is number one. And then I think courage and humility are two traits that I would tell everyone to be. I mean, in terms of just humility, just you're already getting paid the big bucks, right? You know, so be humble.
Yeah.
You know, take the blame for your guys. Don't throw people on the bus. And then when something good happens, reward the hell out of the entire freaking unit. And give all these guys, give these guys, let them leave drill early. Is it really that big of a deal? It's like, you know, I mean, it kills me. And I'm as part of the system, but I just think sometimes that we get so caught up in training that, and I've trained 1,000 hours. I mean, thousands and thousands of hours. And if you let some guy go early from drill, so that way, you know, it's a Sunday afternoon, they just spend all weekend, all day on Saturday training. Maybe it's okay to let these guys off early. It ain't that big of a deal. It really isn't. You know, so again, you know, reward your people, be humble. Don't take a whole lot of credit just because, again, you're getting a paycheck. So just be happy with that. You're probably going to get promoted. Don't worry about your OERs if you do a good job. Don't worry about that stuff. It all takes care of itself. Yeah. And then last thing is just courage. You know, I mean, and when I talk courage, I'm not talking about bravery. I'm talking about just the courage to do the right thing. And obviously integrity is, to me, the definition of integrity is doing the right thing. But I think in order to do the right thing, you've got to have courage. You know, which means that, hey, you know what? If you see some bullshit, then say it. Yeah. Knowing that, yeah, you're probably going to get fired, or knowing that you may get fired, or knowing that maybe you're going to get a bad OER, or you might get chastised for it. And half the time that you think if you're going to speak up, that's going to happen. And I will tell you that for as many times that I've pushed back, war story, and I'm not big into telling war stories, but since I'm on the radio now, it's what the hell. You know, back in 2000, 2008. It was November 2008, I think, and we were already over in Iraq, and there was a lieutenant colonel that was killed in a roadside bomb somewhere in Iraq, and they put out across the board that no commanders would ride in Humvees. Mm-hmm. And I had, I had a battalion of 1,100 soldiers. It was called Task Force Highlanders 161, but we had 2 additional companies from 181. And at the time, we had a hodgepodge of up-armored Humvees, we had ASVs, and we had a handful of MRAPs. And I had this souped-up Humvee that was actually pretty cool. It didn't have a front seat in terms of the TC, and so that was where my radio was. And so I could actually, keep my legs out because I actually sat in the back seat, and I just could sit here, and play with just like if you're at I had a lot of room. But again, it was and I went out pretty much every night on missions with different platoons. And my brigade commander called me in, and he said, "Hey, by the way, you need to get rid of your Humvee. You need to ride in one of your MRAPs from now on." And I said, yeah, it's not going to happen. And he's looking at me like, what do you mean it's not going to happen? It's like, you're a lieutenant colonel, and and I'm a colonel, and you got to do what I'm telling you. I'm like, yeah, it's not going to happen. It's like, you know what? You tell General Lally, who was the 1-star, I said, you tell the general that until I get a battalion full of MRAPs, I'm going to keep driving in this Humvee. And he's like, so he gets all pissed off. He's like, I'm not going to do this. Freaking, I'm going to get fired. It's like, well, just tell him. And the amazing thing is, within 2 weeks, I had 96 MRAPs for my battalion. It's like, again, how fucking cool is that?
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where, yeah, is it risky to be in a Humvee, vice an MRAP? Hell yeah.
Yeah.
But until you get one for all the soldiers, yeah, I'm not going to no offense, but that's a stupid order. And I mean, who am I to judge what's a stupid order? But, and I know you're in the military, so do what you're told. But as far as I'm concerned, if you see something that's wrong,
yeah, what makes you more important than the other guys?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, hey, then have the courage to stand up. And I think a lot of times we don't do that because we're afraid of the consequences, or we're afraid of the perceived consequences. And I think there's enough good leaders that are out there that if they hear the other side saying, maybe what I'm saying or maybe my directive wasn't as good as I thought it was.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate that, sir. And I think extremely valuable stuff that you passed along. Like I said, I take a lot of lessons just from my time with you. I think you provided this, just your impact, like I was talking about earlier, was fantastic. And I think it stretches far. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us. And one last thing for anybody watching, if you ever get a chance, go to the IORC. There's actually the flag that you guys all signed from the initial invasion of Iraq.
That's right.
Sir, I appreciate it. If you like the video, make sure to give it a like, subscribe. If you have any questions for Colonel Allen, make sure we'll pass it along to you, sir. And,
so,
anything else you want to add real quick before we close?
I never thought I'd do this. It's pretty funny, actually. I feel like I'm actually on TV or something. But my company is called Highlander 6 Consulting. So it's just www.highlander and the number 6. So it's highlander6.com. And if you're looking for work, it's all part-time work, but the more that we do, the more you get paid. But if you know of different organizations that want help, I'd love to would love to support them.
Yeah,
so I didn't make that.
We'll throw that in notes. I appreciate that. Hey, and thanks for joining us, sir.
Yes, sir. Joe, thanks, brother. Thanks for having me, man.